Good luck, guys.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Katie from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event, an evening with independent publisher Four Way Books, to celebrate the launch of Peter Coyote's Tongue of a Crow and Bruce Willard's In Light of Stars. They will be joined by Brian Komei Dempster, author of Seas, and Angela Narciso Torres, author of What Happens Is Neither, and Ryan Murphy, Associate Director of Four Way Books, will introduce the evening. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Peter, Bruce, Brian, Angela, Ryan, and the team at Four Way Books for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping things to go over. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways that you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with fellow attendees. So if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the authors, please post that in the Q&A module, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program, so please make sure you're putting your questions there and not in the chat. And importantly, tonight's featured books, Tongue of a Crow, In Light of Stars, Seas, and What Happens Is Neither, are all available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person in our stores from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at our Fulton Street location and our Flatbush Ave location, where you can purchase these and many other books on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the U.S. I'll be dropping the buy link in the chat in just a moment. If you care about the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured books is a great way to show your support. We're happy to welcome Ryan Murphy, Associate Director of Four Way Books, who's here tonight to introduce tonight's event. Ryan is the author of Millbrook, The Redcoats, and Down with the Ship. He has received grants and awards from the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art, Chelsea Magazine, the Fund for Poetry, and the New York State Foundation for the Arts. Ryan is going to start us off before we hear readings from our four featured authors and then move on to the Q&A with all of you. Please take it away, Ryan.
Hi, thank you so much to Greenlight for having us, and thank you all for joining us here tonight. Our first reader tonight, whose book has been being published, the pub date is actually today, is Peter Coyote. No singular biography can really capture Peter Coyote, but here's a start. An accomplished actor in more than 130 films, Coyote is an Emmy Award-winning narrator of over 200 documentaries and 17 audiobooks. He's written two best-selling memoirs, Sleeping Where I Fall and The Rain Man's Third Cure. Beyond acting and writing, Coyote is an activist, songwriter, guitarist, singer, and Buddhist priest who lives in Northern California. Tongue of a Crow is Peter's first book of poetry, a genre he enriches as much as any other. Bonnie Raitt calls the collection a knockout, which reveals the same keen intelligence and wry perspective he showed in his two memoirs, with an eloquent, unique style that lays bare the universal in the deeply personal. Anne Lamott confirms that his poems are rich and lively, sweet and perplexed, full of sorrow and laughter, love and lovers, soul and bodies, Zen and wild Mother Nature, truth, hope, disappointment, resurrection, i.e. life with a capital L. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Coyote.
Thank you so much. After all, a long public life, this is the first time I've had stage fright in a long time. This book represents the culling of 50 years of work. I came to San Francisco in '64 to work with a poet named Robert Duncan, and graduate school palled, and I got pulled into the counterculture. But a couple of years ago, I began going over these with a wonderful poet named Patrick Donnelly, and I'm going to read just a few tonight. Because it encompasses such a span of time, I'm going to kind of go chronologically. This is a poem from 1969, when the Grateful Dead gave me tickets and brought me and two Hells Angels and Ken Kesey and company to England to meet the Beatles. and introduce them to our California scene. It's called London Run. 6 December, London. Gray, junky, pallor sky. 12 to feed and house. Apple office, first stop. Timid George, the skinny one, suggests a cheap hotel. Will they take anybody? Keezy gone for days. This morning's script croaker, his mad maiden aunt and psychotic kid scratching and washing invisible sores, rents us a flat. Room for 8 plus maiden aunt and freak. 81 Prince of Wales mansions, sandwiched between Kensington and Battersea bridges. Shabby fun land across the road chained for winter. Moldy furs, McVitie's biscuits, Taifu tea, strainer brewed. Jack's, legal pharmaceutical heroin, more effective than the weak heater eating shillings. Speed freak litter of candy bars, squashed butts, soiled clothes scattered around the stately manse. The sallow motherly clutter for our brood of feral West Coast birds. Stanley Mouse painting the tanks of the Hells Angels choppers parked in the chilled foyer. My little English Jenny Wren, her leather coat and urchin scarf, breasts pale as talcum powder, brushes and ties up my hair, laughing, prodding me awake. My loneliness for California's damp green hills and fog. Wish I could fly her home. Patchouli scented Saturday, desk in a high London window painted shut. Behind me, Sweet William's eyes closed, dropping cigarette ashes on his clothes. Battersea, they call it. Battered orphans of the wars at home. Sea, the sound of oceans we've crossed in our fretful goings and comings, seeking a new world. So this next one was written at 30, about 9 years later. It's called 30th Year. On the verge of the creek's edge field, my young dreaming hard against the turbulent water, boys new to long pants, trading girly pics, viceroy butts behind the garage. Rods, reels, silvery spinners shimmering out, tempting the fish. The whip of fiber poles, the flash of line, easy as promises to a girl I thought was stupid. She turned her head to check my lips, aimed at hers. Don and Woody weren't dead from bullets in 8th grade, released to the muddy suck of the stream. Moving right along, somewhere mid-career, filming in Bucharest, Romania. It's called The Dogs of Bucharest. The Dogs of Bucharest are dusted with crumbled mansions, ash of red flags. They doze in ruined dreams abandoned by their masters. They bark, whelp, and die without plan or permission. Occasionally, like thinkers, like poets, they are rounded up and shot. A bitch with flapping teats haunts the ruined foundry where I film diversions for my country. Feral eyes watch me poke a sumptuous lunch, the roll I proffer. She trembles, her whimpering pups beneath a rack of iron. Sad and sooty sumacs, tattered sorrel, scattered pages of a book. It's cheap to film in ruined lands. There's a story that the Buddha gave his body to starving lion cubs. The hunger of the dog. Would a better man feed her his fingers? And this one, this one is straight from my own tangled life. It's called Earth is a Woman, Sure. Earth is a woman, sure, but most beautiful when rain-glistened ravens are tattooed on the gray cheeks of the sky, and the wild geese cry Avalokiteshvara's pity for the passing world. To you, my friend, questioning my lifelong addiction to women in despair, I can offer only the mystery of myself, who will follow high cheekbones, long legs of an axe murderess into an abattoir. I evade the point, I know, but can't speak clearly about the constant fog in my mother's eyes and what is required for me to remember her rare smiles. I find the earth most beautiful when it rains, inspiring the limping, wounded rabbit in my brambles to venture forth. Decades earlier, in the fragrant barn loft, safe in the blanket my father clutches around us as if we'd survived a shipwreck. The drumming tin shelters us from the rain assaulting the roof, scents of mown grass, and the pear brandy he rubs off his chin, as if for summoning his own forgetting of the rusty nails set in his flesh when he was my age. His love of rain, his mine. His wife, my mother, pale as a lab rat, was stripped of her rain clothes after my younger sister was born. In this remembered yesterday, our lives were opposing lines of traffic, headlight blind on a two-lane bridge. My father soothes my forgetting with his own, the heaving flank of mountain, his chest that crushes my mother and sometimes darkens and fills the doorway of my room with threat, now sighs like a far wind. High in the eaves, pigeons pace and gargle restlessly. And the last one is, oh no, it's two more, quick. This is called Ceremony. This was, you signaling me to stop? No, okay. Ceremony, crisp as a shaman's rattle, the chitter of nuthatch and junco, late plums drumming the garden steps, mixing his mother's ashes with birdseed, elbow deep in a galvanized pail, swishing the whispering seed with ghostly flower, pollinating each grain with her smoky voice and pearls, his hands in the seed, her flesh a gritty surprise. And this is the last one. This is my final review of the Trump years. It's called The Burned Oak. They rooted too long during the war, ate the tender shoots after the forest burned, the water fouled. Mount a watch, herd what swine are left into the rusty pen, make a gate from the old barn boards, women wet the knives. The oldest boy chooses, shoots it in the head. A 22 will do the job, but it may scream. Force a sharpened rod between back leg, tendon, and bone. Hoist it into the burned oak, cut the throat, drain the blood into a bucket, if you can find one. Pour scalding water down the body. Scrape the hair off the skin. Take a sharp blade, slice the belly open. Move the organ meat to the kid's wagon. Squeeze the guts clean. Wash for winter sausage. We need something like a barrel to pack what we don't eat with salt in case the generator goes, in case we have to fight again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, so much for that wonderful, wonderful reading. Next up, we have Bruce Willard. Bruce Willard's poems have appeared in 5 a.m., Alaska Quarterly, Agni, Cortland Review, Harvard Review, NPR's Writer's Almanac, Poets Lore, Plowshares, Salamander, and other publications. His first collection, Holding Ground, was published by Four-Way Books in 2013. Violent Blues, his second collection, was published by Four-Way Books in 2016. Well, he lives in Colorado and Maine. Tonight, Bruce launches In Light of Stars, his highly anticipated third collection. As poet Katie Ford attests, In Light of Stars is as earthward as it is skyward, and Bruce Willard's imagination is at once corporeal and hauntingly spiritual. You can hear the living and the dead breathe in this book, which is to say, it gives me hope. ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Willard.
There we go. Unmute. Thank you, Ryan. And Katie, folks from Greenlight, thank you. And Peter and Brian and Angela, wonderful to read with you too. So I think I'll read, there are 4 sections in Light of Stars, and I think I'll read just a poem from each of the sections. This first one's called The Half-Life. Of his clothes, I kept one t-shirt, gray V-neck, Northern Pacific patch in front. The line ran out years ago. I don't know if he ever traveled that way. I liked its loose-necked romance, its frayed sleeves, summers with a splitting mall, autumn put up in chords of beech and sugar maple. I liked the enduring stains of life of silence, half tries to vanquish. The line by the house doesn't go anywhere you'd want to go. There's a depot and side rail, one train crossing to the north. A couple of boxcars gather wind and wildflowers. How do you decide to move? How do you decide to do anything one last time? The train never comes and then it's gone. One echo fades as the next one comes into range. What changes is the way the sound moves one world. I'm wearing the t-shirt today, gray, with a little black around the edges. I can feel its retired warmth. Old coal between the rails, once converting heat to something like distance. Its half-life expired as husks of clothing, another crop of lupin, or what remains of a passing life. After oral surgery, when I wake, I visit the islands of Chile, below Ushuaia, close but of another country, disconnected from the mainland of my legs. Regina and Kamloops, the permafrost prairie, towns of my jaw are frozen, and everything south is calling. The sandy elbows of Point Reyes and Point Conception, the knuckles of Baja, my Panama, Bogota, and Machala. Such distance traveled so early in the day without removing my shoes or belt, emotional support at my side, earning miles before the birds of reason have taken flight. How self-righteous to recline and feel no pangs of guilt, death practically out of the question now, a warm sack of fur next to me, like a natural reply, her breathing, ripe with the smell of morning, ice plant, frangipani, and the smell of seaweed. Abeyance, a voice on the corner shouting in the face of night, liquor, bickering with conscience, sleep with desire. A picket fence with a gate you might step over, kitchen windows cranked, open to the street, below the smell of lilacs, entering like a ghost, searching for a single hesitation to haunt. These next two are sort of Antarctica based. I took a trip there a number of years back. In fact, my wife did a beautiful photo, which became the cover of In Light of Stars from that trip. But these two poems were heavily inspired by Antarctica and the islands down there. This first one's called Bridge. If you were here, you wouldn't know the names of the islands and outposts, British, Chilean, Argentinian, and one Chinese Great Wall that has survived another polar winter. On the bridge, the words of our St. Petersburg crew are in the tongue of a Cold War no one remembers, but they contain the coordinates of memory, needs for reference, Trinity, deception, Cape Longing. You'd remember the aging sound of the engines, the way touch bridges expanses of absence and returns us to a place we need to know, the familiar, instruments labeled in another language, the twice hourly bells delivered in Russian that timestamp our journey. At these latitudes, the radar finds mostly ice. It's impossible to fathom what passes nameless and unseen. Here the wind makes space of every surface, vanquishes air to air. A name is reference for the time it holds. Watch me set yours to the austral wind. Useful island. It is night on the black water of the Gerlache Strait, night in the souls of passing bergs, night in the breast of Albatross and Cape Kestrel, and in the crevasses on Mount Parry and Baldwin Peak. It is night in the portholes of passing ships, and in the spirits of explorers, bold, kind, polar night. And the night takes up the gaunt shadows of evening, repatriating each absence to the blackboard sky, returning memory as stars whose journeys arrive like dust, pen to slate, awaiting more layers of dust. And the sea archives its ice as islands, pancaked on the surface, broken by the blues of summer, rejoined as clouds, the color of new snow. And I'll finish with In Light of Stars, the title poem, which ends the book. If you sit without motion, starlight makes holes in the night. Sky, liquid strained, so many years in silence, the milky essence of childhood streaks through. What is there to say of what binds us? What passes through the night without changing burns out, wants someone to burn with. Brother, it's not for us to relive the bruises the body becomes, unseen, unknown. I hope you've been drawn someplace beautiful, held by someone tight in the creamy light of the moon. There's so many stars looking for a constellation to join. Tonight, let us partner the light. Imagine a line that connects each astral point, makes a story we can tell ourselves when it's dark or beginning to rain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for that wonderful reading. Angela Narciso Torres is the author of 3 books, including last year's What Happens Is Neither, out with 4-Way Books. A graduate of Warren Wilson's MFA program for writers and Harvard's Graduate School of Education, she has won the 2019 Yates Poetry Prize and been named one of New City Lit's Lit 50 Who Really Books in Chicago in 2016. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Manila, she serves as a senior and reviews editor for Rhino Poetry. She lives in Southern California. Eleanor Wilner writes of What Happens Is Neither, in images drawn from nature, what the body remembers, and a pitch-perfect ear, her lines reach the profound sadness and beauty of human existence, finding speech for what both demands and resists utterance. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's such an honor and a pleasure to read with my pressmates tonight, Peter, Bruce, and Brian. Congratulations, Peter and Bruce, on your new books, and thank you for those beautifully spirited and electrically charged readings. And to Brian for his wonderful recent release, Seas, which I'm so excited to hear him read from. My deepest thanks, as always, to Four-Way Books for the continued support and for being a dream home for my poems. Thanks to Greenlight Bookstore for organizing this event. Though I join you now from Southern California and was raised in Manila, I was born in Brooklyn during the years my parents were in medical training there. So Brooklyn will always have a special place in my heart. What Happens Is Neither is primarily an homage and an elegy to my parents, whom I lost a couple weeks of each other in 2019. But it is as much a book about grief and loss as it is about reinventing the self and finding one's way back into light even as one mourns. I'll read 4 poems from the book, beginning with Self-Portrait as Rosary Beads. So as far back as I can remember, my parents prayed the rosary every night up until their last days. And during her final years, the litany became a source of comfort for my mother, even when her language began to fail. I kept these rosary beads that my father prayed with up to his last night, and it has become a sort of talisman for me of the faith they had in each other and in something beyond this world, whatever that might mean for you. And it's a kind of solace that I can grasp at when everything else seems to be failing around me. Self-Portrait as Rosary Beads. Curled amid lint and loose change, tucked in a jacket's satin lining, or crushed with used gum in seams of denim, I've known pain clinics and airports, taxi cabs and stale schoolrooms where time is a honeycomb in winter. I am olive wood, carnelian, plastic, black onyx. Am rosebuds pressed into fragrant spheres. Your heat is my musk, your worry, my fire. Pick your mystery. If Tuesday, sorrowful. If Saturday, glorious. I've held you in grocery lines, picket lines, the hours between sleepless and woken. Hold me. I am glass shattered, smoothed by my mother's nerves, pillowed beneath her cheek. Counted, accountable, counting, counted on, crystallized, dangled on a string or hung from a mirror in a river of traffic, praying for green, for an end, for mutiny of rain. Litany of sorrows, of praise. I'm a crown of roses, a crown of purple thorns. I am faithful as breadcrumbs on barbed wire. Lose me to birds or to night's starred thicket. Touch and be splintered, sundered, soothed, surrendered. My scent on your fingertips. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2012. Many of the poems in this book attempt to chronicle her struggle with this disease, the moments of light as her memory flickered, and the pieces of her that I was able to salvage from oblivion in words and images. This next poem is Alzheimer's. There was a piano she loved, cherubs carved on cherry wood. Hands ripple over ghost keys. She nods off, chin to chest. Do you want to lie down? No. Under the palms in a pink house dress. What is your name? She asks again. Cherubs playing violins. Sunlight slips behind ferns. The next poem is in 8 parts, short parts. Each section is like a short prose poem. In one section, I mentioned Davao, which is a coastal province in southern Philippines, where pearl diving is a thriving industry, and where divers often risk their lives diving at depths of over 100 feet on a single breath without proper equipment to find the coveted South Sea pearls. It begins with an epigraph. Is memory as they pretend the mother of the muse or forgetting? James Richardson. Pearl diving. 1. She lapses into music, rising from dinner to play piano as we eat and talk, as if togetherness were a storm in June, filled to bursting, a brooding monsoon. 2. Her memories, black pigeons flying off at dusk. Who knows where they spend the night? Dawn finds them back at the cote, softly cooing. In time, their flights will cover greater distances. Some will disappear for days. A few will never return. 3. When my father comes home from work, she claps like a birthday child. Papa, a pause. Where's my husband? My father, swallowing hard. Still at work, Iha. 4. Casting my line in a dark pool, I bait her memory like fish. Mother, who painted that portrait of you? Tell me your Lola's recipe for oxtail stew. When did you learn to play the kundimans? Her eyes, 2 searchlights, sweeping. 5. Later in bed, she turns to him. Where's Kit, Papa? He dresses in darkness, retrieves his violin case from the hallway. I'm home, he says, kissing her forehead. He sits on her side of the bed till she falls asleep. Have you heard of the pearl divers of Davao? Mere boys plowing headfirst into the freezing deep, holding their breaths for minutes at a time to find the largest oysters, the ones that might hold the prized black pearl. Their only light, dim lamps tied to their foreheads. 7. Her lips form the words to the Our Father all the way to the great Amen. Her fingers roll invisible rosary beads. 8. My father's voice cracks over the phone. She's been looking for you, he says. Calls you Mama or Sister Amelita. Sometimes that little girl who was just sitting there. I've been playing kundimans for her. She knows the words. I'll end with the last poem in the book. Again, many thanks to our hosts, to my brilliant co-readers, and to all of you out there who took the time to join us today. I'll end with another self-portrait. Self-portrait as revision. I am the storm-torn palm frond draped on the balcony wall. I am the cumin in the soup, stirring the lentils' sleep. I am the olive's skeletal pit, the cat paw, the thistle spear. The clay in the kiln cast into a small flask to hold centuries of musk. For weeks I do not sing, though I gush, an underground rill carving blindly to the sea. I succumb to thunder, the urchins sting the softness of moss. This is my prayer. I am driftwood, parched in white heat, soaked in January rain, a seashell pressed to its pale grave. The wind rises, rewriting the hymnals of dunes. I am hurricaned, worn smooth again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela, for that wonderful, wonderful reading. Finally tonight, introducing Brian Komei Dempster. Brian has published 2 books of poetry with Four-Way Books, Topaz in 2013, and more recently, Seas in 2020. In addition to having his work published widely in journals and anthologies, Brian has edited From Our Side of the Fence, Growing Up in America's Concentration Camps, and Making Home from War, Stories of Japanese American Exile and Resettlement. He is professor of rhetoric and language at the University of San Francisco, where he serves as director of administration for the Master of Arts in the Asia Pacific Studies program. Tonight, he'll read from Seas, which has won the Julie Suk Award, as well as Northern California Publishers and Authors Gold Award in Poetry. In this striking book, judges say, Komei holds his son's epilepsy tenderly inside poetic depths of courageous breath, generational responsibility, and the searing beauty of witness, where anguish becomes canvas. Thank you all, and thank you, Brian Komei Dempster.
Wow. First of all, a huge congratulations to Peter and Bruce for their new books. It's lovely to hear your moving work. And Angela, you gave me goosebumps, as all of you did. Gratitude, as Angela said, to Ryan and Martha, who I've seen in the chat, and Hannah and Sally and the whole four-way team. And of course, Greenlight Bookstore, Katie and Chelsea for hosting us. Really, really appreciate it. I'm gonna close with 3 poems, and I want to give you a sense of the arc of the book in a tripartite structure. So the first poem I'm going to read introduces my son, Brendan. Brendan is now 16 years old. He's nonverbal. He has epilepsy and cerebral palsy. And he's been both the biggest challenge of my life and the most beautiful thing that's happened to me. This poem, Brendan Lexicon, attempts to get at the idea of a poet describing his son through language, and at the same time attempting to reconcile something that is beyond language or his own forms of language. Brendan Lexicon. Angel, lion, bird, cluster, seizures. He splashes, barks in baths, screams near edges of pools. Loves the school bus, hates Grace cutting his fingernails. Loves and hates most things. On some spectrum. Shrieking angel, palsied lion, intractable bird. Falls in cracks between labels. My son, 9 years old. Ma, hi, duh, his own language. Atonic drops intermittent. He chases robins, flings our clothes. Against chairs, pounds tennis balls. Claws tabletops for dishes. Tosses spoons, thumps his feet to funk beats. Dunks orange ball, body checks the plastic hoop. Focal motor misfires. Disco bird, point guard lion, wrecking angel. We clap for simple things, guide him back when he misses the toilet, piss staining his pants. Sit too close, he moves away. Sit far away, he moves close. His sounds fly by. He lets out a sad roar through grinding teeth. Staring spells, clonic shaking. Night through day skylights, our peaceful time. Grace and I on opposite couches, flipping channels, backs stiff, pulsing temples, sleeping through madmen, true blood, waking to melted coffee ice cream. It's not that simple to love him so much, to hate just some of it. So later in the book, I continue, the book, the central narrative is a father's journey to understand his son, to acknowledge the challenges, and to also see grace and blessing in getting through those challenges as a family. So I'm going to read a poem from the final section, and it takes off with the bird image introduced in the first poem, but focuses more on it. Metaphor is the way that I naturally gravitated toward describing Brendan, and I hope this gives you even a deeper picture of who he is. It's called Bird Cries. I miss exits, veer through the world, dangerous. Drive with earplugs, strain my neck to check if my little boy is all right. At home, I wear headphones to block out his squawks. In my own birdcage. Shut up, I yell when he breaks through. Squeeze his cheeks hard. Hold him by the shoulders. Be quiet. A flock of seizures. His fingers claw into my wrist. He says so little, I can't shut him out. His good arm flaps, shadows swoop down on him. I keep him from falling, keep him from flying. Some sounds are torture, my dad says. If my boy is quiet, his friends will like him. When he screams, neighbors could think I'm hitting him. I strain to hear the radio cry when I drive to work. A blackbird can be seen 13 ways. I fly to retreats to write about him. When I come back, he is still caged. I shampoo his hazel hair and he soothes me with coos. Aye, nice voice, buddy, I tell him. He nests quiet in his wheelchair. Poor little guy, my mother reminds, so much to say and no words. His mind, a deep sky, she believes he will rise into. Okay, so it's been a real pleasure to be with you, a real honor to read with my fellow pressmates and wonderful poets. Sending love and gratitude to everyone for being here. I'm going to close with a short poem, Sun Sutra, and my grandfather is a Nichiren Buddhist priest, and the Sun Sutra is a sutra form I've created in honor of Brendan, and it's S-O-N, but you're going to hear other manifestations of sun in the poem. Sun Sutra. Boy of stars, sun inside, fallen without a sob. Rest against me, bending sunflower, still the flutter. Ease your head, sun, it's late. No way to before. Your skull shadowed and sunlit, turn, deepen us with your shadow words, muted sun. Say dad after me. Your scattered sun petals are sutra nightfall. I gather you, my bruised sun. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those fantastic readings, everyone. I think we're going to open up to Q&A now. We have a few to start off with that look like they're all for Peter. So everybody who has questions for the other readers, please get those in. Seems like we started off with some questions from the top and then kind of fell off from there. So let's see, this first question that we have is from Judith Gilbert. Peter, you know so much about pacing the reading of text. How has this informed how you write? Can you say something about what you have learned about the rhythm of English, please?
What a tough question. The first thing I have to say is how tremendously overwhelmed I am to be reading with poets of such luminous skill. I hardly believe I belong in this country. But to Judith, English to me is a song. It's a musical tableau. And when I'm writing, sometimes things fall into rhythm. Sometimes they fall into sonority. None of it is by rule. I try to stay as close to the one as I can, which is an old bebop expression for being in the moment. And it's consonant with my Zen practice. I don't have any rules about English, just to try to be authentic.
Our next question is from Mark Hume. Peter, first, congratulations on debuting a collection of your poetry. And this question that follows, I think if anybody else has something to chime in on this as well, it could be for everyone. What advice or suggestions would you give someone that wants to debut a collection of his or her poetry? How would you suggest a person reach out to a prospective publisher?
I don't know why you're asking me this. I mean, I would let the others answer. I've never had a poem published that I can remember, even though I've been writing for years and years, and my friend Patrick has been sending them in for me, and for some reason, they've never been published. So I think I would ask Angela or Bruce or Brian.
Okay, I will briefly answer and just say that I really think the focus first would be the process and the work, and that maybe sending out for publication could be a testing ground or litmus test to see where the work stands. But even before you do that, to have full confidence and faith that you've done everything in your power to make the book as strong as you can, and be very, very honest with yourself about that. And don't pretend that some of the poems that you don't believe in actually are better than they are. And so I would focus on getting intensive feedback from someone you trust, whether that's an editor, a writing group, or both. And that's one of the things that Four-Way Book is so amazing for, is their sort of honest, authentic feedback, and then great productive revision suggestions to get the work where it needs to be. So that's my short answer, but I'll hand it off to Bruce or Angela.
I'll jump in. I echo everything that Brian said about making sure you've done everything that you humanly can to make sure that your work is as high caliber as it can be. If that means turning to fellow poets or mentors, please do that. But also I would add that to never stop believing in the content and the work that you're championing for yourself. I feel that if you write the poems that really mean the most to you and that really touch the undercurrents that make us all human, that these poems will find their way in the world. And with my first book, it took me almost 3 years sending them to contests and to publishers before it got picked up. And I almost threw the towel in, but somebody who may even be here today said to me, this is your blood, sweat, and tears book. This is your first baby. Put it in a drawer. Don't tinker with it. Just keep sending it out and work on your next collection. But this book will get published. Just believe in it. So yeah, that's what I would leave you with.
I don't have a whole lot else to add to what Peter and Brian and Angela just said. I'm personally just a huge believer in rewriting and putting things aside for sometimes for 6 months, a year, and coming back to them. I really believe that that's a great process, and I also agree that having good readers that you encourage to be really honest and critical of exactly what they think works and doesn't work, it really makes your poems much better. But that'd be my 2 bits.
That's great. Thank you all for that. The next one is from Ben Silva. This one's also directed at Peter. He says, "Hi, Peter, love your work. My name is Benjamin. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I just wanted to ask, do you believe that if we are present within the mind, the body, and the soul, will we view life with more clarity and precision? Will we be able to discharge with a better understanding what is required of us, and will we discover what is required of us?"
You have to read that question again. I didn't understand it.
Sure. It was, do you believe that if we are present within the mind, the body, and the soul, we will view life with more clarity and precision? Will we be able to discharge with a better understanding what is required of us, and will we discover what is required of us?
Yes. I have the feeling it's a little embarrassing. I think that this is like television or something, some kind of media celebrity, that these questions are being all directed at me. It's like I'm in the presence of great poets here, and I don't feel comfortable taking all the questions.
We have some more that are directed for everybody. So the next one's coming up are a little more spread out. The next one is from Allison Adair for all 4 of you. And thank you again. She says, I wonder if you could talk a bit about how reading poems publicly reintroduces you to them. They're so personal. Is the act of writing them different from at all from the act of reading them?
Pick someone.
Oh, I'll jump in. I'll jump in. So yes, I would say that, you know, probably for all of us, we wrote these poems in private, and hopefully the vulnerability we revealed, it felt safer at that moment when in the composition. I think when you publish a book, you then obviously think about the idea of public sharing of the experience and the work. And I think that's something that you want to account for when you decide to publish the manuscript. At the same time, for me in this book, as I've told Martha, I mean, it's probably the most deeply vulnerable thing and scary thing I've ever written. And I was pretty terrified, honestly, to share it in public. But simultaneously, I've been very grateful for the reception that audiences have given me, because I do think the notion of authenticity and vulnerability in the public forum is most often appreciated. And that's something I maybe underestimated or did not anticipate, and it's been a pleasant surprise. So that's my answer. Maybe I'll hand it off to people. So I'll say Angela. How about Angela?
Okay, challenge accepted. There's definitely a different feel to the poems when I read them out loud, and I feel them reverberating in my vocal cords and my body, and also hearing all of you read your poems, although I may have seen some of them in print. I feel that poems were made to be heard out loud. They have an oral as well as an ORAL, as well as an oral AURAL quality and dimension that we don't just get from the page. And so I'm grateful that we have this forum to hear each other and to speak our poems. There have been times when reading from this book, which is so hugely about some very recent losses, that I've been surprised to tears while reading them, even though I've read them 7, 8, 9 times already. And it's almost as if each time I revisit them, it's revisiting the grief in a different way, depending on where I am that day. And so, I mean, it's because poems are living things. Poems are evolving in their meaning for us as well as for the reader. And so the only thing to do is to meet them where you are and just be and honor the work and be present with them.
You know, I would say an observation on that process. It's an interesting question. I find, since I'm a great believer in writing out poems longhand and avoiding going to keyboard as long as possible, it's really not until I read them a number of times that I can actually take them to a keyboard and know how they should look on the page. So much is about enjoying the development of the sound and the line breaks and how they work in a longhand version first. So.
You know, much of my earlier life was spent in the company of poets, Gary Snyder and Lou Welch and Bob Creeley, and guys who were my friends who probably had no idea I wrote poems because I was too shy to share them. And, you know, I've been fearless writing these things and stuffing them into this drawer for 55, almost 60 years. And this is my first experience of the terror of facing, you know, an audience with these little intimate secrets and pieces that are coherent to me because I know all the interstitial connections. So I really identified with what Brian had to say about the kind of anxiety and fear that comes, especially in this internet age where the climate is like barbed wire. It's full of snarking and vicious comments and lack of kindness. So if it wasn't for Patrick Donnelly and my friend Sherry Head, who's got her foot in the small of my back, pushing me forward to do Zoom readings and things like that, I would have probably just mailed everything off and just kept writing. And so I'm learning this whole new world of reading these poems aloud. It's brand new.
Okay, our next question is for Brian from Judith Gilbert. Brian, my cousin had cerebral palsy and you gave me a taste of her reality. How has it been in the COVID-19 homeschooling era for maintaining your bird cage while being called on to be more of a resource for your sunny son?
Thank you for that question. It is very sensitive and thoughtful to put that way. Well, it was very difficult when Brendan didn't have school. School gives him structure, a sense of ritual, and he lost all of that for quite some time, from about March 2020 to maybe June or July of 2020. When he returned to school in September, it really made a massive difference. So maybe to look at it more spiritually, I would say that Brendan and I have become closer than ever because we've been in a physical space together with my partner, Grace, all the time, as I'm sure many of you can relate to. And in that sense, I think I have seen his grace and his sunniness because he's a very positive kid, a beautiful kid. Simultaneously, it's also been claustrophobic, and he senses the anxiety of the global and political situation, even though he can't necessarily articulate it. He senses the sense of isolation of not having social interactions, at least, not so much now, but in the months before. And so I will say it's been paradoxical. And overall, since he's been back in school, I think that return to structure and normalcy has been really a stabilizing force for all of us. I hope I answered your question. So thank you so much for asking.
And this last one, I think we have time for just one more, is for everyone. So this one's in the chat. Do you pick a theme or a subject for a poem before beginning to write, or does sudden inspiration define the direction and subject of the poem? Let's ask, Bruce, would you start us off on that one?
Sure, I go both ways. Oftentimes there's just there's an opening line that leads somewhere and I have no idea where, and I just follow that. Other times, particularly as I get towards the tail end of a manuscript, it's clear to me there's a hole or there's something that needs to be filled in, and I'll tend to write more towards a particular subject because it rounds out a section or it feels necessary. So I would say both ways.
For me, it's somewhere between picking a theme and sudden inspiration, but it's neither one or the other. I never think that it's as controlled as picking a theme, and it's never as uncontrolled as sudden inspiration, which I think is overrated. I feel that it's equal parts of both. Like an image will compel me, like looking out the window, and I write to it, and it leads to a memory or a thought or an idea, and I just write to that. And for me, the best poems are the ones that you don't really know how the ending will pan out. It's easy to get into a poem, but it's really hard to find the ending. And it's most of the work is getting to that ending and finding out why this image or this thought or idea compelled you in the first place.
I'm kind of in Angela's school. I think about a big wall of ivy, and sometimes a leaf will catch my attention. That leaf will be an image or a thought, or even sometimes like a couple of notes of music. And I'll just start and trace the connections for the rest of the vine. And I never write to a theme. Usually I discover it, or the line itself or the image will encapsulate the subject. Like I have my book is dedicated to my baby sister who's died. And there's a number of poems that she would come up in an image. And so I knew what the subject matter was, but really I still had to be faithful to that image and work it out and trace it out. And so the writing is the discovering. And then I'm with Bruce in endless rewriting, just endless.
Okay, well, I'm with all of you on all of it. So I do fall in the middle in terms of, you know, as everyone has already said. And I like what Peter's saying about the discovery. I think that's really important. I think that even if you have a initial triggering subject image, that if you contain it or you attempt to control it or intellectualize it, it creates a very static poem. And I think if you get associative or metaphorical or allow leaps to occur, that's where the electricity and fire and duende occurs. And, you know, I like what Bruce said earlier about revision, in terms of revision can actually be creation. I really believe that. And if you have a poem that's not quite working, write it backwards or turn a haiku into a, you know, like Angela's 8-part beautiful poem that she read. And so you know, change the point of view. So I think that a lot of it is having a lot of great material to work with and then being willing to revise it in a creative, imaginative way.
Thank you, everybody, for those fantastic answers and those amazing readings. Peter, Bruce, Angela, Brian, all so great. We are so happy to have hosted you all. Ryan, thank you for introducing everybody, and thank you to Four-Way Books. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And don't forget to buy your copies of tonight's featured books in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. The links are in the chat. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you,
Thank
Katie.
you so much. Bye, Katie.
Thank you.
Thanks all.